In this episode, we're analyzing the rhythms of Radiohead, one of the few bands who managed to successfully reinvent themselves and pull off the transition from rock to electronic music. Lucky for us, they also embraced drum machines in the process, using them in many different and interesting ways. We'll examine some great Radiohead beats, you'll hear how they work in context, and once you see how it's done, you can also use those ideas in your own tracks. So let's get started. Hello everyone, this is... Their fourth album, Kid A, marked a new era for Radiohead. Following a period of intense frustration, the band left behind their traditional rock sounds and ventured into experimental electronic territory. To be honest, I didn't know what to make of Kid A back then. Maybe it was just a bit too much to handle for a guitar-obsessed teen who at that time thought OK Computer was the best thing since sliced bread. But of course I eventually came around to embrace Kid A, which was heavily influenced by warp record artists like Aphex Twin, Autechre, Boards of Canada and Square Pusher. Let's start off with the title song of the album. 112.9 BPM. The Kid A beat consists of two parts, a glitchy carpet of electronic drums and Phil Selway's acoustic drums, both heavily processed. There are a few ways to go about the electronic part and I've tried different approaches, but here's the one that makes the most sense to me. We're going to need three sounds, a shorter kick or tom, a deeper one with more decay, and a shaker. You can of course use any sounds you like, but if you want to try these specific sounds, then you can download them for free right now on our Patreon, both samples and Syntakt presets. The link's in the description. We're now going to build two different layers. You can of course program these directly on the Syntakt, but we're going to use an external sequencer so you have a better overview of what's happening. The first layer is a very simple metronomic backbone. The longer kicks go on every beat, accompanied by a shaker on every eighth note. Let's mute that and keep it for later. Here comes the interesting part, the second layer. On the shorter kick, I'm going to activate all steps. But instead of playing it straight like this, we're going to add swing. The final step is to add some dynamics. By placing accents or changing the velocity of the steps, we can turn this rather monotonous pounding into a much more interesting and complex rhythm. The pattern is actually 4 bars long, but I'm sure you got the hang of it. I'll put the sequencer into velocity view later so you can see the remaining 3 bars. Let's put everything together. It's interesting how these two layers fuse into a single rhythm. And now we're going to combine the electronic drums with acoustic drums, which has become a staple technique in Radiohead albums. This is a fantastic drum part by Phil Selway. It's mostly freestyled, not a repeating pattern. Don't nail me down on the kick drum though, it's very hard to hear with all the distortion and the electronic drums playing at the same time. The acoustic drums actually start off with a little less swing in the first bar and then work their way up to nearly the same level as the electronic drums. Sounds super jazzy on its own, but listen how it all comes together with the rest. Idiotech is a song that pays homage to the roots of electronic music. Johnny Greenwood's starting point here was to build his own drum sounds from scratch using a modular synthesizer. Just like Roland back when they prototyped the voices of the 808, for example. Their engineers first created the sounds by patching everything together on a System 700 modular and then rebuilt that into dedicated circuits. Johnny recorded 50 minutes of improvising drum patterns on his modular, and on top of that, he played a record of 1970s electronic music compositions. One of those tracks is Paul Lansky's Mild und leise. In 1973, Lansky used digital FM synthesis. That was years before the first commercially available digital FM synthesizer. And he did so by programming his music via punch cards on the Stanford University's mainframe computer. Absolutely fascinating. From Johnny's 50 minutes of noodling, Tom then cherry-picked a 40-second piece around which they built the song. I've tried to capture that modular approach with the Syntakt. I took some noise and fed that into a resonant filter. Depending on the cutoff frequency and envelopes, you can, for example, get a snare or a shaker. For the kick, I used the Syntakt's BD Sharp engine. 137.5 BPM. And since this pattern is not in 4/4, but in 6/4 time signature, we're going to need 24 steps. And that's the intro. We might already be seeing a common theme here. Radiohead's electronic drum parts tend to be pretty spartanic. We haven't even used more than 3 different sounds per song yet. This intro pattern will also return later with different shaker variations, for instance this one. Or this one. Watch out for the others on the sequencer later. Right off the bat, there's an anomaly during the intro. On its last run through, the shaker disappears and the pattern is cut short, so only the first 16 steps are played. The main pattern from Idiotech can easily be created from the intro, so let's make a copy. We just have to roll this out to 80 steps. Which I guess would make this 5 bars in 4/4 time signature. This is where the intro loops again. We're only going to keep that first kick of the loop and remove all following ones. In the original, that last kick is actually much shorter than the other ones. It feels very cut off. There are a few ways to do this, but since I won't be working on the Syntakt sequencer directly, where I can use parameter logs, I programmed the kick drum patch to be receptive for note lengths. Now we just have to make sure that the kick notes are long enough to ring out naturally, and then we can make the last one shorter. If you want to learn more about that, or if you're looking for alternatives on how to achieve this effect, we posted a free guide on our Patreon. And of course, it's all in our Drum Machine 101 book. You can find all links in the description. And here's another interesting thing about Idiotech. I believe there's an 808 hiding among all those found sounds and sonic textures. Let me explain. Okay, so I've connected my trusty 808, and I'm going to program a few simple patterns which we're going to use to generate a longer sequence. Keep in mind that these are just some examples, since the original seems to be improvised, but you should come pretty close with these. The first pattern is for the high conga. The idea here is that we place quarter notes, and then we add some fill steps around them. These will only play while I'm holding the fill button. Let's make a copy of that. On here I want the fill notes coming a 30-second after the beat, so I'll use microtiming and move them to the left by 50%. Then one on the low conga. To mix it up, you can also tell steps not to play when you press fill. And finally, one for the rim shot, with regular 16th fill notes. You can make more patterns and use other instruments, but I think this should be enough for a demonstration. I'm now going to jump between those patterns and use the fill button to bring in some variation. Okay, now we'll take this recording and speed it up by 400%. That's a really nice way to generate glitchy percussion textures, which we can put over the main drum beat.
So, the captain called in sick today, and he asked me to film a segment for this episode. He didn't say which song though, so I'll pick the opener of the album. Here's Everything in Its Right Place. 123.8 BPM. Kicks on every beat like a metronome. The original sounds like it was recorded in a disco toilet, so I'll add a low-pass filter. That wasn't that hard. What's always taking him so long? Done. Time for lunch.
For live versions of their songs, Radiohead occasionally ditched their drummer Phil Selway in favor of a drum machine. This was also the case on videotape from the Scotch Mist webcast, which they did to promote their self-released album In Rainbows. This version features Johnny Greenwood on the Roland TR-909 with a very hands-on performance. This is the main pattern, and every change Johnny makes evolves around it. The performance builds up to this with a few variations, and finally the layers are cut back and deconstructed again. In contrast to the album version, this features a kick drum on the one, which takes away a tiny bit of that syncopated feel from the original, but makes the rhythm a lot easier to get into when performing the song live. 72.2 BPM. Also, I'm open to debate about whether this low tom is there for the entire song. It's very subtle and easily overpowered by other instruments. But since it keeps popping up, I'm just going to assume it's always lurking in there, like my existential crisis. Do note that this pattern is in 30-second scale and runs twice as fast, so this is actually only half a bar. Ah yes, the song best known for its use in the end credits of everyone's favorite vampire movie. Oddly enough, it wasn't included on the soundtrack album. Anyway, we already made an entire episode about 15-step using 2 different sequencers in tandem, so check that out if you like to venture into 5/4 time signature.
Hey, that's a great way to make this video 18 minutes shorter.
I know, right? We arrive at Radiohead's latest album, A Moon-Shaped Pool, from 2016. It blends cinematic strings and choir arrangements by Jonny Greenwood with electronic elements, which you can already hear in the first track and lead single Burn the Witch. Apparently, the song had been in production since the days of Kid A and was even occasionally teased during concerts. Thom Yorke likes to use Elektron stuff, and to me this sounds very much like an analog rhythm. He was first spotted using one live in 2015, so that would actually check out for the album released the following year. We don't have an analog rhythm anymore, but we have the Syntakt, which has some of the rhythm's sound engines, so let's give it a try. Kick, snare, and cymbals. The intro is a crescendo of cymbals that you slowly fade in. This plays together with the strings. The tempo is 74.5 BPM, but you can also program it in 149 BPM with a half-speed tempo multiplier. On to the main pattern. A fairly straightforward kick and snare combo. This really only works together with the cymbals, which add to the general nervousness of the song. But we're not done here yet, because these need some loudness variation. Listen how this instantly brings more movement into the pattern. One last detail, when connecting this pattern to pattern 3, the last cymbal hit is left out. Pattern 3 shakes everything up as the rhythm begins to stumble. In the previous pattern, the cymbals did their own thing. But here, they interlock more tightly with the kick and snare for additional emphasis. Again, some accents on the cymbals. In the second bar, the drums suddenly drop out for a moment, as Thom sings "Do Not React." To get the most out of this jarring effect, it's not enough to just remove any drums here. You actually have to abruptly mute the drum machine to cut off any trailing sound, like this. Oh, sorry. This is a recurring effect that happens a few times during the song. There's also a fourth pattern, but it's just more of what we already programmed, so watch out for that on the sequencer. The album version of The Numbers has Phil Selway playing drums, but there is also a fantastic stripped-down live version of this called Johnny, Tom and a CR78. The Roland CR78 is of course a preset rhythm machine, so Johnny only had to press play to get this beautiful dusty old rhythm. But let's have a look at what the machine is actually playing. I don't own an original CR78, but there are some options. You could use samples, an analog replica like the TT78, or the ACB emulation on Roland's newer drum machines. And since we need exactly 6 sounds, the TR-6S is just about qualified for the job. Ironically, the tempo of the album version is 78 BPM, while the CR78 version runs a bit slower. Feels like a missed opportunity, to be honest. Bass drum, snare, low conga, high bongo, maracas, and hi-hat. The only thing you have to watch out for is the metallic beat. That's a bright ting sound that you can mix into the cymbals and hi-hats. Here you can add it via the metallic parameter. On the TT78 you can use the tone control, and if you're using samples, be sure to choose one that has enough of that tinny sound in it. The kick is quite busy in this pattern. We get a snare on the 2 and 4, and an extra 1/16 before the 3. The low conga concludes each half of a bar with 2 hits. Let's turn the conga volume down a bit. When I originally transcribed this 3 years ago, I thought the hi-hat was playing on every 16th, while alternating between accented and unaccented hits. But while reviewing my transcription for this video, I noticed that you can better identify where the hi-hat is playing by concentrating on the ting of the metal beat. And that's actually only on the 8th notes. The rest is simply glued together by maracas. There is a second variation, so let's make a copy of this pattern. We'll take one snare away, shift the kicks around, and we'll add some high bongos. As you can hear, these form a nice counterpart to the low congas. Just balance out the volume, and we're done. Play the first pattern 3 times and conclude that with the second pattern. Repeat until the song is over. We hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, a big shout out to all of our patrons. Thanks to your support, we can keep making these videos.